Hey there, Living the Dream podcast fans. It's your buddy Adam from Podcast Launch Tips. It's the podcast where I teach people how to correctly launch a successful podcast and get their message out to their ideal audience. You are listening to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, and it's time to bring out your host, my pod pal, Curtis Curveball Jackson.
Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by a special guest, composer and sound designer, AJ Churchill. AJ is the co-founder of the Lunar Company, which is a fiction podcast startup. So for all you fiction podcasters out there, you're going to want to listen to this episode. Earth Eclipse is their first show. It is an award-winning podcast. Not only is AJ involved in that, but he is also involved in building an app called Apollo, which is an app that's going to be specially designed for fiction podcasts. So we're going to be talking to him about all that he's doing and the opportunities that might come from it. AJ, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Curtis. Thanks so much for having me.
Why don't you start off just by telling everybody a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm AJ, as you very well introduced. I am a composer and sound designer. I'm based in LA right now, but I'm originally from Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was born and raised there and then moved up here to the US for college in 2009. In college, I started writing music for anyone that would take my music. And so I wrote for a lot of student films in college. Eventually, I worked up the courage to see if I could get someone to pay for my music. So I started posting on Vimeo forums and different places, trying to find paid work. I got a little bit, and then that kind of settled in my mind that maybe this was something I could do as a career. And since then, I've scored a couple feature films. I've worked on some podcasts, including Earth Eclipse, which you mentioned is what I've been working on for the past year and a half, 2 years over the pandemic. I've scored some concert music, theater productions, and even 2 museum exhibits, which I'm very proud of. Yeah, so my background has been in music and audio. And then more recently, I've had the opportunity to work alongside 2 friends of mine, Nick and Victor, to create this podcast app, Apollo, which I'm also really excited to talk to you about.
Well, tell us about Earth Eclipse, because I understand you guys remotely produced it during the pandemic. So tell us about the show and tell us about what it was like to remotely produce it during the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, man. We didn't plan on remotely producing it. It was originally, we were going to record it in a studio, and then COVID hit Los Angeles around, I guess it hit all of the US in March, and then we scrambled to figure out what we were going to do. But yeah, Earth Eclipse is our first fiction podcast production. It is a sci-fi audio series. It's an epic, kind of like a space opera, a bit like Star Wars, and a little bit in that vein. It has 8 episodes. It features a full cast, and so it's like kind of listening to a movie in your ears. So you put on your headphones, and hopefully they're good headphones, because there's a lot of sound design and music to immerse yourself in. And it's 8 episodes, and it follows the story of Dr. Alexine Prometh, who is a memory researcher. She's trying to hack memories 2,000 years into the future, when humanity is already a spacefaring civilization. And in doing so, she's working for this company that has been contracted by the human government in that time. And the story goes on, and she uncovers some conspiracy theories. This memory project that she's working on is perhaps a little bit more nefarious than it seems at first. And the government, the Concord, as it's called, that hired her to do it, has some ulterior motives potentially. But the themes that the show follows are quite relevant to nowadays. I think it talks about surveillance and privacy, talks about authoritarianism, what it means to be free, what is freedom. And yeah, I think I'm just really excited for people to hear it. It comes out on December 15th, and it's been a work in progress. It's been a work that we've been working on for, a year and a half now. And then doing it during the pandemic was an incredible challenge, especially since this was our first show. The process was, we started out in late 2019, so before, I guess, COVID existed, and we wrote a pilot for the show, which was 25-minute script, and we cast it. And then right when we were going to record in person, COVID hit, and we had to kind of scramble our plans, and we ended up buying some microphones for our actors. We shipped it to them. We treated some of their rooms, the ones that didn't already have setups that we thought sounded good enough. And we went from there. But it was quite a challenge to do everything over Zoom and organize a crew of, I think it was probably around 30 people, cast and crew all together. So it was quite an ordeal.
Well, let me ask, there's another guy that I interviewed from California, or in California. He has a podcast called Serum. It reminds me of you guys kind of have like similar to fiction thing. You ever heard of that podcast?
Oh my gosh, yes. Shane Salk is
Yep.
the Serum guy. Yeah, he's fantastic. I've met with him a couple times over the past year. I met him at a conference called Podcast Movement 2021 earlier this year, and then we met in LA after that conference as well, just to talk about fiction podcasts and to talk shop a little bit about kind of where he sees fiction podcasting going. I didn't know you interviewed him. That's awesome.
Yes, I did. And when you talked about your podcast, I said, I wonder, does he know Shane? Well, let's get in and talk about your Apollo app. Tell us about that, and why did you feel the need to build it, and why is it different than other fiction podcast apps?
That's a great question. We came across, after we finished our show, we applied to a bunch of festivals, and we were trying to figure out, what the best way to get the 8-episode season out there, what the best way would be. And we got into Tribeca, which was a fantastic experience for us. And we kind of thought that, we got into this major festival. It was the first year that they were doing fiction podcasts and podcasts in general. And we thought that was going to be it. That was going to be kind of like, oh, we got into this super prestigious festival, and now, people are going to be knocking on our door to try to license our show and get exclusivity. We were waiting for the call from Spotify and Audible and whatnot. And it turns out it's not quite that simple. Even for a show that has won, a lot of awards and we've received quite a bit of praise for it. And I think we think it's fantastic. It's still very difficult to sell a show that is fully produced. It's also difficult to sell a concept. And we just ran into a bunch of gatekeepers. Like, we had one company that was interested, like a big company. I don't want to mention any names just in case I get in trouble, but we had a big company that was interested in exclusively licensing Earth Eclipse. And it turns out that the person that could make that decision was on paternity leave for the next 3 months. And I have nothing against paternity leave at all. I think it's fantastic, but there's no one else at this massive multinational conglomerate that could, greenlight a show that has already been completely produced, like literally just sign on the dotted line for the next 3 months. And I guess if this one person is off on paternity leave, then that's it. So with those kinds of experiences, having issues selling the show, we realized that there just isn't any platform out there right now that serves fiction podcasts that are open RSS fiction podcasts. So as a podcaster, I'm sure you know about the RSS ecosystem and how it's, the reason why your show can be on Spotify and Apple and on all the platforms essentially with very little effort. And so we were like, well, does this exist for fiction? And it turns out there isn't such an app yet for fiction. There is no open RSS fiction podcast app that just has compiled all of the fiction shows that have been released as podcasts on different hosts. And so there are a couple private apps that exist to serve that one production company. And so there's a couple companies that produce their own show and they have their own app, but it's closed. It's literally just their shows that are on those apps and the shows that they license. And so we dreamt of something that was a bit more open. So something that was not going to have, all the Joe Rogans and the dailies and other nonfiction shows, but was going to have every single fiction podcast that is available open RSS. And so we found it as the way to get our show out there and to potentially grow this medium, grow the entire medium of fiction podcasting, and just maybe set some standards for how these shows should be distributed in the future.
So, talking about fiction podcasting, why are you guys so passionate about fiction podcasting? What made you want to choose that over anything else?
So when we were coming out of 2019, my two friends, Nick and Victor, were working at this other company that was in downtown LA. It was a content creation company. And I think they were a little bit demoralized on the job, and they were ready to quit after a few years at that company. And they got together and just asked themselves, what can we put together that would complement all our skills? And so Victor is, as far as I'm concerned, a business visionary. He lives and breathes business strategy, and he's always thinking about, ways to improve services that are already out there. And Nick is a creative visionary, and he has been, writing and telling stories since he was very young. I've actually known Nick since I was a kid. We used to make Lego movies together. And so I think the two of them got together and were like, well, what can we do as a project, once we are kind of done with this job? And they came up with, let's make a fiction show. Let's call AJ, who, my background was in film music. And so I knew how to manipulate audio and use the DAW, the digital audio workstation. And so they called me and asked if I wanted to be a part of this small project, which turned out to be, a lot bigger and turned into a lot more than we expected. It started out as a side project, and then it kind of grew into, very fortunately, a full-time thing for us. But I think specifically fiction podcasts, it was for those two reasons. One was like the practical, which was these are the skills that we have. We can do this together right now, and we can start putting this project together. And then the other part was we just love telling stories. Nick and I, as I mentioned, we used to make Lego movies, like stop motion movies, when we were 8 or 9 years old, living down in Brazil. You take a picture of the Lego and then you move it a frame, and then you take another picture of the Lego, and then you kind of put that all together. And we were making, crime thrillers and stuff using Legos when we were kids. And so it just was always something that we were interested in, is just telling stories and the power of storytelling. And I think that fiction podcasts and just the medium of audio, it allows you to tell a story that has scope. It feels big and it feels immersive, but it doesn't break the bank. It doesn't take crazy amount of money to put one of these things together, because I had a lot of the software already on my computer, and then you just have to find the actors and cast people. But it's not like you have to, Earth Eclipse as a film would, just the locations alone would cost tens of millions of dollars probably. So we have none of those issues with audio, and we're able to just spend a couple $100 on some sound effect packs, and that's our location budget, quote unquote. So it was a bit of those. It was a mix of the practical, it was just what we could do, and our desire to tell stories.
Talk about the future of fiction podcasting. What do you see it heading in the future?
We think that fiction podcasts are growing like crazy, and that is kind of the theory of our entire company at this point. we've learned so much about the medium and the state of this community over the past year and a half. One stat that we've discovered is, I don't know if you know about the website Reddit, but it's basically just a big forum. There is a specific subreddit or a subforum on this that is on audio dramas. And while the website Reddit as a whole over the past year or past couple of years has grown, I don't know, let's say 100% in user base, this specific audio drama subreddit has grown something like 400 or 500% in the past few years. And so we think that this medium is growing a lot and it's catching on, but it just hasn't had like the fertilizer to really get this thing going, because everything is fragmented, right? You make a show right now, and pre-Apollo, I guess Apollo's not really out yet. It comes out on December 15th, but the current state of the industry is you make your show and then you essentially have to hope that either Apple or Spotify or someone or another big podcasts player is going to feature you. And that's a whole battle on its own to get yourself featured. And that's essentially the only game in town. That's the only thing that you can kind of bank on is them featuring you. And then all of a sudden you have a bunch of people listening to your show. Well, we just didn't want to wait for that. And I think that the industry, the fiction podcast community deserves a place that is exclusively for fiction podcasts, a place where it's not getting cluttered in, page 50 of whatever search result you're doing on Spotify. We want more than just one fiction playlist. Right now, I think if you go on Spotify and you type in, you want to find audio fiction podcasts, there's one playlist that has 20 Gimlet media shows, and Gimlet is owned by Spotify, and then they don't really update that very much. So it's just hard to break in right now if you're a fiction podcaster. And so there's just so much great content that's great stories that are being told in this format that just don't get surfaced. They get passed around by a very avid, a very fanatical community of people on Twitter and different audio drama communities, but it kind of stays within that group and it doesn't end up breaking out, except with a few exceptions, like some big shows by, say, Q Code. But yeah, I think it's going to grow. And I like to think of it as kind of like in visual media, in film. It's not like documentaries or nonfiction are dominating in the film world, in the visual media world, but they are dominating in the audio world, right? There are way more nonfiction shows than there are fiction shows, but I'm not sure that is going to stay that way. We think that there's going to be some kind of a balancing out, and there will be way more fiction shows in the future coming out. And we hope that Apollo is the platform that catalyzes that growth.
Well, I think it's difficult to break in if you're an independent podcaster in any genre, but
yes.
Now, do you have any current or upcoming projects? I know you got the Apollo app coming out on the 15th, as well as the Earth Eclipse. Anything else that people need to know about?
Well, those two are pretty much all that we have on our radar, and that's taking up 100% of my time. Earth Eclipse, the full series is coming out on the 15th. It'll be available on all platforms, including Apollo, where it will be available ad-free. So if you want to listen to the show and binge it with no ads, you can download Apollo on the 15th as well and have a listen to Earth Eclipse on there. In terms of other projects that we have on the back burner, we do have and I think you're the first person that we're announcing this to. So we do have an Earth Eclipse holiday special that will be coming out sometime in Q1 of 2022. And it's a single episode that kind of takes place between, I want to say, episodes 6 and 7 of Earth Eclipse. But that's sort of the only thing that we're actively working on right now that's on the creative end. We do have a lot of plans for next year's Lunar Company slate. We would like to release a few different shows apart from Earth Eclipse next year. And we have great ambitions for the lunar company. We want to, grow Apollo as a platform. And then we also want to release a number of shows from the lunar company, and a number of fiction shows, and start some new series as soon as we can. It's just, our company is literally just the three of us right now, and so it's pretty small, and we're 100% dedicated at the moment to make sure that the launch of Apollo is as smooth as possible, and the launch of our show, which we've been waiting so long to launch, is also as smooth as can be.
So Apollo, is it going to be Android and iOS, or what platforms is the app going to come out on?
Yes, it's going to be on both. In fact, we're testing the beta of it right now, and it works on both Android and iOS. There will also be a little bit of a web player component. When you share a show from Apollo with a friend, if they don't have Apollo yet, it'll take you to a website that will show some basic features of Apollo and allow you to listen to the show that your friend shared straight from your browser as well.
Okay, this question is for all of my blind friends in the blind community. Is the app going to be accessible for the blind community on both platforms?
That is definitely something that is on our radar. We had to prioritize the functionality of just the basic, building the podcast player and then categorizing all the shows. But we absolutely want to make our app as accessible as possible. And so I think in probably the first half of 2022, sort of depends on funding as well, but it is absolutely something that we want to include there and have plans to include.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I definitely will be downloading and checking it out so people can stay connected with everything that the Lunar Company is up to. Throw out your contact information, website, social media, so people can keep up.
Yeah. So to learn more about Earth Eclipsed, our first fiction podcast show, you can go to eartheclipsed.com. That's our show page, and it has everything Earth Eclipsed on there. To learn more about our company, the Lunar Company, you can visit lunar.fm, and that has information on Apollo and Earth Eclipsed, as well as future plans for the company. And then if you want to follow me personally, I'm on Twitter at AJ Churchill is my handle. I really love receiving messages, and so feel free to shoot me an email or a tweet there. You can also email me at aj@lunar.fm. That's aj@lunar.fm. And yeah, we love receiving messages from people, so please get in touch.
Close us out with some final thoughts. Anything that you want to touch on that I forgot to touch on? Anything you would like to close us out with?
Well, I would just absolutely love it if people would download Apollo on the 15th. I think even if you have never listened to a fiction podcast before and you have never been introduced to this world, which I hadn't been until about 2 years ago, I hope that you'll give it a try, because I think one interesting story is when we finished our show, I shared it with friends and family, including my girlfriend's dad. And he listened to the series. He had great feedback, great advice. He loved it. But I think even more interesting was he then started listening to other fiction podcasts. Like, he started sending me messages about, hey, I listened to this and I really enjoyed it. Have you heard this show? What about this one? I didn't like this one. And so I think it was really cool for me to hear that by introducing him to our fiction podcast, he then kind of got a gateway into this entire medium that I guess he hadn't really listened to anything like that since the old radio dramas of the past. And so I hope that Earth Eclipsed, but really Apollo, is able to open that door for people that don't necessarily think that they are going to like fiction. They may be used to listening to audio like nonfiction shows, but maybe they just haven't gotten introduced to fiction, and they don't know it exists. And so I hope that I hear more stories like that, because I think that will show me that Earth Eclipsed and Apollo have succeeded in making, a slight change to this medium, and that will make me very, very happy.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out. I love fiction podcasts because you can get the moral of the story with just the audio. You don't have to see it.
Yep.
Ladies and
Absolutely.
gentlemen, eartheclipse.com and lunar.fm. Make sure you check it out. Share, follow, rate, review. Share this episode to as many people as possible, especially all of your fiction podcast friends. And hopefully we can get this genre out there more. Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store and download the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast app. AJ, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to all the things that the Lunar Company is going to be up to in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Curtis. It's been a huge honor to go on your show. Really appreciate it.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.